What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you 5 games with unsatisfying endings. A couple of things right at the top of the video though. For starters, some of these games have multiple endings, so I'll be talking about very specific endings, and then others have basically the ending. So something to keep in mind there. Secondly, obviously I'm going to be spoiling at least one ending of every game I'm about to talk about, and I'll throw a spoiler list, if you will, of the titles down in the description below so as not to spoil the surprise of the list itself. If you want to see what games I'll be spoiling, down in the description. And the third thing before we jump into this completely is that I said unsatisfying endings. I do not necessarily think these are bad endings, or that there was something wrong with the writing in some way, etc. I just mean that they're a little unsatisfying in general, even if they make narrative sense. As oftentimes, some of these are actually good endings, or I would even consider them pretty reasonable in the way things get wrapped up. However, they don't exactly scratch that itch for a satisfying ending. Number 1 on our list, we have Pathfinder Kingmaker, which always seems to find a way onto my list of more negative things. However, for Pathfinder Kingmaker, I do specifically mean every ending that isn't the secret ending, as the secret ending is the only ending that allows you to kill the Lantern King. The Lantern King, of course, being the last boss, as well as the sort of hidden antagonist for most of the game. However, unless you do the very long laundry list of requirements to kill the Lantern King, which actually requires you to romance Nyrissa, which might be something that most people don't want to do, but is required if you want to get the secret ending and kill the Lantern King, because every other ending sees the Lantern King spared despite having caused all of these problems and death. So while I don't necessarily want to romance Nyrissa like the secret ending requires, I do want to kill the Lantern King, which the regular endings do not allow you to do, so it's kind of a frustrating coin flip in that regard as to which one do you want? Do you want to spare Nyrissa, or do you want to kill the Lantern King? But nonetheless, that brings us to our second game, and that is Prey. So I actually love Prey as a game. I do think the ending is kind of though, and that is primarily because it does that thing where the entire game was actually more or less a simulation. Now, while I do think Prey manages to do this in a way that makes narrative sense and isn't that bad overall, it's just one of those endings where it's like, oh, nothing I did actually mattered because none of it was real, even in the context of it being a video game. So while I do think they could take this ending fun places if they ever made a sequel, which I don't think they will, but my point is it's kind of open-ended for places the story could go, and they even managed to do some fun things in-game with this knowledge once you are aware of the simulation. But nonetheless, it kind of just, in my opinion, invalidates most of your decision-making, etc. once you realize none of it really mattered because it was all fake. Which is funny to say in the context of a video game, but you get what I'm saying. And then number 3 on our list, Pillars of Eternity 2 Deadfire. Deadfire is another game that I love very much. And while a lot of people will say a lot of things about the main story, I mostly just didn't like the endings. I found them very unsatisfying. So there are some variances to how things play out specifically, but the big ending is the cliffhanger of how is the world going to deal with the broken metaphysical turning of the wheel, which recycles souls, which allows new people to be born. But this process is interrupted at the end of Deadfire, which, as you might imagine, is a pretty big deal. So the game ends on this note of kind of despair, really, because if this continues, everybody's going to just be wiped out and the planet of Aora becomes a desolate wasteland unless this gets solved. Then you counter that with the real life happening of PoE2 not selling particularly well, meaning that we're very unlikely to ever get a third one and find out what happens next. And you have a situation where the ending itself was kind of unsatisfying, of course, combined with the fact that we have no idea when or if this question will ever be answered as to what happens next. So just kind of a frustrating situation around the ending to that game all around, which is a shame because the rest of the game, the gameplay, etc., is so amazing. To have it in that way is kind of a bummer. 4th on our list, we have Divinity Original Sin 2. Now, in this particular game, I'm talking about one ending in particular, and that is the Purged ending. So I've covered Divinity lore a lot on this channel, but if you're unaware, the most likely canonical ending to Divinity Original Sin 2 is the Purged ending, where all of your party, if you will, gives up their source and become essentially silent monks before being rescued in some plot convenient way. However, they are nonetheless actually purged of their source. Now, this ending is unsatisfying for a lot of reasons. For starters, obviously you essentially have to sacrifice most of your party, and even though they survive it, you don't know that when you're making the decision. And number two, this essentially allows Lucian to get off scot-free for the absolute horrors this man has inflicted upon the world of Rivellon, which is a recurring theme because Lucian is often depicted as the good guy, yet 9 out of 10, he's the one causing a lot of the problems. Now you compare that to an ending where you ascend to divinity yourself and take that power unto you, which is, much more satisfying, at least in a power fantasy sense, than just essentially giving up your powers for the good of the world. And it leads to an unsatisfying conclusion because the purged ending actually sees the world at peace for a subsequent period of time. Now, obviously, thanks to games happening later chronologically, such as Divinity 2, we know that doesn't necessarily last, but the purged ending for the world of Rivellon is arguably the best. It's just not the best ending for you, which just makes it overall, again, fairly unsatisfying. And that brings us to our last title on the list, and that is Call of Cthulhu. Now, this is by design, of course. If you're familiar with the Cthulhu mythos at all, there aren't exactly a lot of happy endings. Things are not supposed to end well. That's the point. It's cosmic horror. Things are supposed to go wrong and be terrible. And that is, of course, the case with the narrative game Call of Cthulhu, released by Cyanide Studio in 2018. Overall, pretty fun game, especially if you're into Cthulhu stuff, but as you might imagine, because it's Cthulhu mythos, all of the endings are very, very bleak. And of the 4 endings, again, all of them are kind of different shades of terrible. One sees you basically just dead. One sees you driven insane and drowning in drugs and alcohol, etc. It's just 20 shades of terrible all around. And after trying to guide Detective Pierce through all of these mysteries, etc., it's sad to see him drawn to his inevitable fate, which is madness, as is the standard of what the Cthulhu mythos is. So again, it's by design, but it's inherently unsatisfying as a result. There you guys go. There are 5 games with unsatisfying endings. By all means, let me know what endings you find unsatisfying in gaming down in the comments section below, or just what endings you absolutely love, which we'll probably do something similar of next because it's easy. But regardless of all of that, truly just thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.